You're live.
We're going to have a little mini lecture here today on shaping. Shaping and reinforcement. If you understand how differential reinforcement works, then shaping is a piece of cake. Easy peasy. So let's do a quick review of differential reinforcement. With differential reinforcement, we're going to reinforce one set of responses and put another set of responses on extinction. We're going to apply differential reinforcement in the shaping procedure. So they are connected, but they're separate. So here's our definition of shaping. We're going to differentially reinforce only that behavior which more and more closely resembles the terminal behavior. Okay? We're going to differentially reinforce only that behavior that more and more closely resembles the terminal behavior. Resembles equals successive approximation. Resembles is a more concrete, clearer term than successive approximation. The old word, the one that Miller uses, is successive approximation. Okay? So, shaping with reinforcement, there it is. Let's talk about the purpose. When you use shaping, you're going to use it to bring about a new behavior. You're going to use it to bring about a new behavior. A behavior that is not in the organism's repertoire. Okay? It is simply not there. You can also use shaping to increase the likelihood that a behavior in the repertoire occurs more frequently. And the way you do that is by shaping the component responses and reinforcing them. And then eventually that behavior in the repertoire will occur. Okay? Most of the time we use it for establishing a new behavior, a new response.
Can you go back a slide?
Okay? Got that? All right. So, what I'm going to describe here in the next few slides is how to do the shaping procedure, because we're going to have an activity that allows you to do shaping. So this becomes really important as we approach that activity. It's a point-earning activity. I'm going to introduce some terms that are not in the book, but they are very important. They're going to show up on a quiz or an exam. Okay? So the first step that you've got to do in your shaping procedure is identify the terminal response. This is the behavior that's going to be performed at the end of the shaping procedure. The terminal response. The next step you're going to take is identify the initial response. This is a behavior that is at least minimally occurring. And it resembles the terminal response along some meaningful response dimension. We talked about response dimension previously, so we have a little review here. Response dimension is the physical properties of the response. That's response dimension. And some examples of response dimension: topography, that's the form or the shape of the behavior. Latency, that's the time from the signal to the onset of the behavior. Duration, how long it takes that behavior to be performed. And then force, magnitude, amplitude is another dimension. So that initial response is occurring with minimal frequency and it resembles the terminal response along some meaningful response dimension. One of those four listed. Then, the next step is to identify the intermediate response. This is the behavior that's halfway between the initial response and the terminal response. Halfway between. So you can think of the intermediate response as a closer approximation to the terminal response. It's halfway there. So these are your first steps. This is an error that students make. So there are only three responses in shaping: initial, intermediate, and terminal. And the answer is a big fat no. Those three responses that you've identified in your shaping procedure, they are only guideposts. They are only markers. This is where you start, this is the middle, this is where you end. Because you are going to be differentially reinforcing behaviors between the starting behavior and the middle. And there may be many. And then you're going to reinforce a bunch of behaviors between the intermediate and the terminal response. And there may be very many there too. You're going to be reinforcing approximations or behaviors that more closely resemble that terminal response. And there can be very many. Okay?
Can you go back to the last slide really quickly?
Okay, there's our last one. Got it? That's where we were. This is where we're going. Making it work. This is how you're going to earn all those 10 points in the shaping exercise coming up very soon. You've got to observe behavior. When we do our shaping exercise, we're going to have a warm body in front of the classroom. You are going to observe the behavior of that person. And when that person engages in the initial response, you're going to reinforce that behavior immediately. And with reinforcement, that behavior is going to be more likely to occur. So you're going to reinforce it again and again to make that behavior a little bit more likely to occur. And then you're going to put that same behavior on extinction. That's step number 4. Now, with extinction, if all goes well, we will see, you will be able to observe an extinction burst. That person will start engaging in the previously reinforced behavior more frequently, more forcefully than they did previously. But you're going to keep that behavior on extinction. And we also hopefully will observe a change in behavior. This is where the extinction burst produces novel behaviors. Different behaviors are going to occur due to extinction. And one of those novel behaviors is going to be a closer approximation to our terminal response. As soon as that occurs, you reinforce it. And you reinforce it a little bit more. And then you put that behavior on extinction. and we observe the same process again. That's how you make extinction work. And eventually, you will get to step 9, where you're reinforcing approximations, then putting that approximation on extinction, and you're gradually creeping closer to the terminal response. And when that occurs, you reinforce that behavior mightily. That's step 10. So it's a combination of reinforcement, extinction, reinforcement, extinction. When we do the exercise, you'll be doing this in a group. So your group members have to be on the same team as you. Meaning they're going to be observing and reinforcing approximations just like you are. And things can go very smoothly. Here's our shaping contingency. This is a real shaping contingency. So let's take a peek at this, because this is what you will be working on during this activity. So we start out with the behavior. What is the terminal response? Okay, the terminal response is saying words clearly. What's the initial response? That is occurring with minimal frequency and resembles the terminal response along some meaningful response dimension. Moving his lips. In order to speak clearly, you must move your lips. So lip movement that occurs minimally resembles our terminal response. So lip movement is what we reinforce. And then we're going to put lip movement on extinction. But we need to identify our intermediate behavior before we start extinction and reinforcement. Croaking sounds. A croaking sound is an approximation to speaking words clearly. Now we've got our behaviors for the reinforcement contingency. And once we have those, it makes it easy to just plug them in to the extinction contingency on the lower branch. And then we implement the extinction contingency. Contingent on lip movement, we present the reinforcer. Andrew gets a little bit of gum. He engages in lip movement again, he gets a little bit more gum. Lip movement again, a little bit more gum. And now we're going to put lip movement on extinction. And now we're going to wait and observe. We are waiting to observe a closer approximation to the terminal response. Some type of vocal, verbal noise. When he moves his lips and makes a vocal, verbal noise, that behavior will be reinforced. We'll reinforce it a couple times. Then we put that behavior on extinction. And we wait until we get closer to the intermediate behavior, croaking sounds, and so on. Okay? Any questions about shaping verbal behavior before we go to the next slide? All right. This is another real example. This is shaping, putting on eyeglasses. This is a subtle one because the behavior is putting on the eyeglasses, not wearing the glasses. Can a dead man wear glasses? Yep. Then it ain't behavior. So we are shaping the behavior of putting on eyeglasses. So again, we walk through the steps. Terminal response puts on glasses. Initial response carries glasses. Intermediate response, glasses are held near his face. And then we go through the differential reinforcement process to shape putting on eyeglasses. So how can we tell the difference between shaping versus differential reinforcement? So let's start on the left-hand side. Some terminal behavior at the start. That's just yes or no. In regular, everyday, vanilla reinforcement, we have a behavior that we can reinforce. It's already in the repertoire, so we can reinforce that behavior. In shaping, successive approximations, there is no terminal response. That's why we have to shape small bits and pieces to get to that bigger behavior. On the flip side is true. Some terminal behavior at the start, no for shaping. Successive approximations to the terminal response, yes for shaping. So a simple way to ask the question is the terminal response in the repertoire? Yes, then you use plain old garden variety reinforcement. No, then you need to use shaping. Okay? Any questions? All right. Mr. Video Man. That would be Cody or Sawyer.
That guy that shaped the chicken to shoot you.
Keller Breland.
Yeah.
This one?
Yes. No, the last slide.
Last slide. That one?
Yes.
We'll talk about Keller Breland soon, after the midterm. Any questions? Are we done? Was that a yes or no done?